this investment, the royalties in Alaska in the Cook Inlet, are just extraordinary in so many ways. And when you just look at it for the first time, uh, most investors, from my experience, when they look at it, they don't really grasp the magnitude, the unique characteristics of this investment, which is it's unlike anything that any of us will ever be a part of ever again, I think. And it's 25 years in the making, and it's on the 1 yard line, and it's so exciting because how often can private investors, accredited or non-accredited, get involved into a development where hundreds of millions of barrels of oil has already been identified, drilled into, hit, tested, and then backed by a world-renowned engineering firm into the hundreds of millions of barrels of oil. And to make it even more exciting, all the engineering is done, the development is on the way, the wells are permitted. This thing is about to take off, and I'm excited about it because I'm excited about it for me, but also for all my partners, my employees, all of us. We've been working on this for quite some time, and we're finally arriving to this place of enormous cash flow, and I mean that steady cash flow. That when you can get involved in investment and you've got cash flow that just sustains itself for decades on end, and you don't have any liability. You don't have any exposure of any kind. That you don't have to manage it or trade it or massage it or do any of those things. It's just pure cash flow, and that is coming from an enormous source. So when you look at this, you've got an investment that has other characteristics that are unique to itself. For instance, you know, there's an argument to be made that oil and gas royalties, particular in this case, they have immunity to inflation. So as the dollar loses the value, the higher the revenue income stream goes. So I mean, it's amazing, quite honestly, and um, to be able to have private investors come in and participate in an offshore development, hundreds of millions of barrels of oil. The infrastructure is going in. It's about to catapult into a real property value, bringing enormous equity value, and then cash flow starting in, really in, 2026, the cash flow should start. And once it does, of course, it's going to continue to climb up and up and up. And what I mean by that is when this development starts and it's underway, which it really is already started, but once they drill the pilot well next year to the platform and cash flow starts to come in, you have to realize that we're talking about 40 wells ultimately that are going to be drilled with the latest drilling technology. Um, we're talking about 3D modern directional drilling technology with enormous production outputs. I mean, these wells out here in the Cook Inlet, they're doing 10,000 barrels of oil per day, sustained. Okay, we're not talking about initial production and then they drop off. We're talking about sustained rates at several thousand barrels of oil per day, and multiple pay zones. And what's great about this that most people don't really understand, because we get into the science of it, the geology, they don't really understand the geophysical nature of this reservoir in the Alaska Cook Inlet. It's multiple reservoirs that are just stacked on top of each other. And we already know that. Layers and layers and layers, thick pay zones stacked on top of each other. And we already know this because it's already been drilled into. It's been tested. We've got flow rates, pressure readings. We've got as much science and data, conclusive information that you could possibly have before you go into this infrastructure and development. And naturally so, because look, this is a several $100 million development. you pretty much got to know that you got it before you start spending several $100 million to bring it to surface. And that's where we are. And for private investors to come in and get involved at this stage, just before it skyrockets, is unheard of. Private investors, particularly non-accredited and accredited investors, I can't think of another opportunity where they can get into a royalty play with reserves this large just before it goes into production. Sure, investors can go buy royalty income after it's already in production, but then, of course, you're paying an absolute premium. And that's what we're avoiding here. So there's a window of opportunity where investors can participate just before it skyrockets in value, just before it converts into a bankable asset, just before the cash flow starts. And all this occurring at a time when we're really kind of at the precept of an oil and gas bull market. And I know it doesn't seem like that because oil prices are down, but that being said, the short-term price doesn't even matter here, because we're talking about what is the price of oil going to be over the next 30 years? And I know some clients of mine said, well, yeah, I'm older, I'm not going to be around in 30 years. But what the beauty is? You have so much financial flexibility in this investment that once the cash flow starts and as it builds, so does the base value starts to build. So you could bring it forward or liquidate it at any time. And there's strategy in that too. Some investors might just want to hold on to the cash flow, leave it to their inheritors or to their estate. Others might want to bring it forward. Hey, if you use a present net worth calculator, in some cases, people might be more interested in receiving $4 million all up at once versus having 12 over 20 years. So, that's something to be considered. So this is just an amazing opportunity. Without getting into the science and all the technical stuff, I can just tell you where we are. We are on the cusp of this development generating itself into a bankable asset, cash flow starting that will sustain itself for years.